see if I get this running. Okay, can you see my presentation right now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so thank you very much. So
you can
yeah,
to the show model. Now it's still not the show model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. We're indeed dealing since quite a couple of years with extraction chromatographic resins and the use of these resins for the separation of DTMs before the measurement by alpha spectrometry, mass spectrometry, but especially liquid scintillation coating. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview over some of the more recent work that we've been doing in this development, and also some ongoing and then some upcoming work. So a bit of an overview overall. Don't really want to go too much into that, as Julien already kindly told. So France-based company, we still have some links with iChrom, but it's a separate company, fairly small, about 19 people, quite tech heavy. About half of the company is actually more or less in the lab. They don't let me get into the lab that much anymore. I'm a bit too messy, I guess. And most of the work that we're doing is indeed development of new resins, new techniques, and also applications, with the main focus really being extraction chromatographic resins that are then used in quite a wide range of different domains. Lately, quite a lot of radiopharmacy, nuclear medicine, something that's coming up, but really the most important applications still are the quantification of alpha and beta emitters in environmental samples, biological samples, and decommissioning samples increasingly. You all know extraction chromatography. Still added one slide. So basically what you have is an inert support that might be a silicate. Most of the time it is a polymer. It can be indeed, and we'll see that later very shortly, it can be a plastic scintillation microsphere. That is possible too. So you got this inert support that's impregnated with an extractant. So sometimes you find the term solvent supported solvent extraction or solvent impregnated resins that very much boils down to the same. What is quite interesting for us is by this way of preparing the resins, it's fairly easy to modify the selectivity, to introduce different kind of selectivities to really try to match selectivities to a certain extraction problem. There's a very wide range of different extractants available, amines, phosphinoxide, crown ethers. I'm going to show a couple of examples during the presentation. Again, fairly easy to modify the selectivity of such a resin. And fairly frequently, people combine different type of resins to analyze several analytes from one sample. One thing that is problematic for some applications is as the extractant is not covalently bound, just impregnated, you do have some trouble with bleeding. So some of the extractant is going to leave the cartridge or the resin, but this is usually a fairly small amount. We're just coming back to the R&D group. So basically, we're split up in two laboratories. One is more the synthesis lab that's work on new resins, new extractants. That's including at the moment quite a lot of work on macrocycles. Also some work on actually covalently binding, so not only extraction chromatography, but actually covalently binding the extractants. The application lab is really more preparation of extraction chromatographic resins and characterization of selectivities, development of methods. We do have some equipment that's mostly used for the characterization. One point that's really quite important that I'd like to stress, we are very limited in what kind of radioactivity we can handle. So we quite heavily rely on R&D cooperations. And you will see that during the presentation, a couple of names pop up fairly frequently. So what we do is we develop the resin. We try to do the method development as far as possible cold, a little hot, but mostly cold. Then we get in contact with an R&D partner that is actually going through the last steps of the hot testing of the resins. And you will find that MPL, Radonal, lately Supertech quite a bit. Long-term contact with University of Barcelona and GRU. So quite a lot of research cooperations. And if that is something that's of interest for you, to work with us. We are more than happy to get in contact with you. So with that, I'm actually going to jump into chemistry. The first one is a really quite new resin in terms of it's new for us. It's not something that has not been described before. The first couple of slides is going to stay on Tech99, which still remains one of the most important DTM. So this resin 202 is based on polyethylene glycol, which is in this case crafted in a support, so it's technically not extraction chromatography. It's an aqueous biphasic system. So basically what you need to extract ions like technetate or the paronate is you need a fairly high concentration of water structuring anions, sulfate, carbonate, hydroxide, molybdate. That's also the original application. Originally, we've been working on that mostly for the separation of Tech99M from irradiated molybdenum targets, fairly large, up to a couple of hundred of grams. So the presence of a large amount of anions of matrix in that special case is actually quite beneficial. What is quite particular and where we feel that there might be a good application is that you need to work in quite high hydroxide concentration. So if you see the graph on the lower left, working at 5, 6, 7 molar sodium hydroxide will allow you to extract molybdenum and rhenium very strongly, amongst others from dilum. And again, if you are in the presence of other water structuring anions, in this case molybdate, you will find that adding more matrix, more of these water structuring anions, you will increase the retention of the technetium. So overall, that feels like a system that might be quite useful for the analysis of samples that do have quite a lot of anions of matrix charge. So again, retention should be from something like 5, 7 molar sodium hydroxide. One example that we feel is quite interesting, that is currently under beta testing, is work on alkaline fusion. So decommissioning samples, for example, concrete samples that were going through alkaline fusion, taking these, go through the resin, try to retain the technetium, rhenium, which may serve as internal standard. As you can see, in terms of chemistry, it is close enough, it would seem, to allow it to be used as a proxy for the technetium. And then elute with water, which is generally quite suitable for example, for liquid scintillation counting. And you can elute in a quite small volume of water as you take away the high concentration of the cosmotrophic anions. One point that's a bit particular, the water is still going to be quite alkaline, which might interfere with your measurement. So what you would want to do, and what we're looking at the moment, is just go through a cation exchange to neutralize, maybe take out last traces of cations from the solution. And if you still want to increase your detection limits, or have a much smaller volume for your measurement, you can then take the solution, still go through an aluminum oxide cartridge, concentrate the technetium, and then elute in a very small amount of sodium chloride to get a solution that is again highly concentrated compared to what you have in the beginning of the separation. So the second work on technetium is TK201. It is compared to TIVA, it's a much weaker anion exchanger. It's actually a weak anion exchanger. Main application has become copper separation for radiopharmacy, so copper 64, copper 67 production. Still, we have been doing quite a bit of work on technetium separation. What is a bit particular is that, especially also compared to TIVA, the retention in HCl is very, very high, even up to 2M HCl. So you can extract the technetium from quite high acid concentrations. It's not quite working as well for nitric acid, so you would tend to stay at about pH 1. On the other hand, you are getting into a region where you can start looking to dilution of the technetium, something like 3 molar, which is a bit lower than for the TIVA resin, for example. Here also, the rhenium is following the technetium quite closely. So you can use it as a proxy for the technetium. Another point that is quite important, maybe even more so for mass spectrometric determination, is that the resin is showing very low selectivity for molybdenum in general, and especially at higher than 0.5 molar nitric acid. The selectivity for molybdenum is extremely low, so that allows for a quite nice separation of technetium from molybdenum. So that's something that we've been testing out. It's basically the wide variety of elements that were tested are removed during load and rinse. That is including molybdenum, which is removed quite sharply. I feel sharper than, for example, on TIVA. Then you can elute either in 2-3 molar nitric acid. The higher the nitric acid concentration, the smaller the volume. So that might be a benefit. Or alternatively, which might be preferable actually, you can use ammonium hydroxide, 0.2, 0.5 molar hydroxide, which are a bit softer elution conditions that might also be a bit more suitable for LSC measurement, but also for mass spectrometry if that would be needed. But still, so there are a couple of advantages, but still you need a quite large volume to elute the technetium before the measurement, which will take quite a lot of time at the end of the day. So there is indeed we feel more elegant solution, and we've been talking about that already a little bit. So that's the use of plastic scintillators. So we've been in contact. So we've been following the work of Jose, Alex, and Hector since quite some time. We've been working with them since quite some time, and we felt that now would be a good time to look into officializing that a little bit and to make these kind of materials available from our side. So the inner support indeed of these materials is a plastic scintillation microsphere rather than a completely inert polymer that's impregnated with selective extractant. So a lot of work has been done by the University of Barcelona. On our end, this is just the first one. We are looking to setting up a whole range of products. So the first one is the one that is based on the aliquot extractant, which is quite similar to the TIVA, that we will make available as TKTC scent. We're going to add a couple more to this product range over time. We feel that there are actually very nice applications indeed in rental monitoring, but especially also in decommissioning, high active samples, where the fact that you're not eluting, that you're not evaporating, not taking aliquots, prepare them for the measurement is actually quite an advantage. So just separating, keep it on the cartridge, then put the cartridge in the counter and measure directly. That we feel is a really quite important advantage. And as already indicated, you can use rhenium here too, as to determine the chemical yield. In that case, via ICP-MS, by determining its concentration in the effluents. So that's something that is quite new and that is coming up right now. So after that, I'd like to move away a little bit from technetium to another element that we have started getting more requests on, cesium, particularly cesium-135. So we've been working on macrocycle-based resins for cesium since quite some time. It's been going through beta testing since quite some time. We feel that we do have enough, quite a lot of requests for now. So we are looking now into getting that out there. So the resin itself is used for cesium and rubidium separation. Again, it's macrocycle-based resin. The selectivity itself for the cesium and for the rubidium over other elements is quite high. Extraction is very elevated for dilute HCl, dilute nitric acid. You can extract both of them until about like 1 molar nitric acid. After that, you start to elute both the cesium and the rubidium. So basically, you could imagine two different type of applications. One is water samples, acidified water samples, with respect to the quite high BW of the cesium, the rubidium. direct load of an acidified water sample, just concentrate on the cartridge, rinse off interferences with 1 molar nitric acid, and then elute the cesium and rubidium with nitric acid. If you need for your application to separate both, it's possible too at about 3 molar nitric acid. A bit cleaner separation is obtained when you directly load from 1 molar nitric acid and then elute in 8 molar nitric acid. So generally load from more or less dilute nitric or hydrochloric acid, then elution in quite high concentrated acid, which is in itself a bit unfortunate. It's usually not what we are looking for. One of the options, instead of eluting, what you might be looking to is just rinsing with water after the separation, dry, and then push the resin into the vial, a bit like it's done for TIVA from time to time. Then measure cesium-135 directly in the LSC vial as a power. I'll get back to that a little bit later. We are currently also looking quite a lot into turning these kind of resins into discs. So that might be a nice application, just concentrating the cesium using a disc from a water sample, and then rinse off impurities, put the disc in LSC counter, and then count the disc acids. One of the drawbacks quite clearly is the capacity for cesium is quite limited. It is interfered by potassium, which both of them will limit its use for the application environmental samples. So we feel that it's really something that is quite only applicable to decommissioning samples, but in that type of application, it is actually it might be quite helpful. So from one of the more complex resins that we're working on, I'm switching to the most simple actually. TK400 is basically just a long-chain alcohol. So you see, we're already going through quite a lot of different type of extractants. There's an original work that was done by Andrew Knight from University of Iowa, that time mostly neptunium-practinium separation. It is actually pretty much like a super soft anion exchange resin. You need to work at very high HCl concentrations, and even then, there's only very limited amount of elements that is actually extracted. So protactinium is certainly the main application. There are a couple of other elements like molybdenum, iron, polonium, gallium, neop, that are also retained. So protactinium is a bit the standard application. We start looking into using that for iron separation, as the capacity is about a factor of 4 or 5 higher than for the true resin. So that might be quite helpful, especially for somewhat more iron-rich samples. And in general, we try to integrate that into a larger ongoing project that we have with a French university in Zubatec that's trying to come up with like a separation scheme for DTMs in decommissioning samples. So try to cover a quite wide range of different elements and try to systemize the separation to get to some kind of systematics to facilitate analyzing quite large enough number from this kind of samples. So typical application would be, we feel iron, molybdenum separation, mostly iron, I think is the most interesting. So if you load from 9 molar HCl, pretty much the majority of matrix elements and of beta emitters is washing through the resin. Most of pretty much anything else is eluted in 5 molar HCl. Then you can recover the iron, neop, and the molybdenum as a group in dilute HCl, directly load onto ZR resin. That's a hydroxamide-based resin, and then separate step by step iron that you obtain as a 2-MHCl solution, neop as oxalic acid solution, and then molybdenum as a 6 molar nitric acid solution. So that's something that's currently being tested in the frame of this cooperation. Another application is actually something that we get from time to time. That's basically neop is an interference on the quantification of zirconium, of plutonium-241. So basically, you can just use it to remove traces of niobium and from zirconium or from plutonium-241 samples before LSC measurement. So that might be, for example, using stacked TK400 or UTIVA cartridges. Another fairly new resin that's we're using in a way that is getting a bit more interest is TK200. It's a topo-based resin. That's quite known extractant again. Very high retention of actinides, really very, very high. One quite particular point that I'm going to show in a minute is that it does extract a number of actinides, even at pH 2. So that is something that should alone, that's something that we're looking at increasingly, to use the same resin to pre-concentrate the actinides, or any analyte really, and then purify on the same column. So that's an ongoing work. That's really also a bit in terms of optimization of separations, which is quite clearly something that is getting more popular over time. So again, very high retention of actinides. So there's work from Wang et al. On uranium rule for plutonium, and working on a couple of other elements like platinum, palladium, and zinc separation. So again, quite interesting data from Nora Weida. Very high, generally DW values for the actinides, uranium, thorium, particularly plutonium. One slightly off-putting, but it's been confirmed by several laboratories. That's distinct is the difference between plutonium-4 and neptunium-4 that might boil down at the end of the day to a problematic of stabilizing neptunium-4 as neptunium-4 in these kind of samples. There's some uptake of americium. So you see, basically, a number of actinides can be retained at pH 2 and then still retained at quite high nitric acid concentrations besides americium. In HCl, it reminds a little bit of one of the UTIVA resin, so quite high retention still of uranium. Thorium pretty much not retained at all. Plutonium easily eluted in dilute HCl, but very strongly retained in high HCl. Neptunium behaving fairly similar to plutonium. Americium not retained at all. That pretty much boils down to an application that we feel is quite interesting. So that's really ongoing work that still needs to be optimized. But the idea is take a water sample, acidify, load through cartridge at a bit elevated flow rates, concentrate the actinides on the cartridge. In that case, it's probably going to boil down to uranium, thorium, and plutonium. Americium is retained to a certain extent, but we feel for 1 liter, it's not good enough. That might work for smaller volumes at the end of the day. Then just step for step elute the actinides. So not quite there yet, still ongoing, but it is something that we find is quite interesting, and it fits also with another type of request that we get increasingly. That's the in-field pre-concentration. So basically, instead of taking a 1 liter water sample in the field, you directly pre-concentrate your sample on a cartridge in the field. And instead of bringing the water sample back to the laboratory, you basically bring back a cartridge to the laboratory. It's actually something we're working on quite a different range of applications and on not only radionuclides, actually elements. So that's quite generating quite some interest at the moment. This one I'm going to keep quite short. Actually, we're not quite as advanced as we would like to have been. Radium is still one of our most important elements that we're working on. We've been doing some work with MPL that led to an actual application. Also, that's really more mass spectrometry. And the idea is again a bit the same. Try to take one cartridge, concentrate the radium, remove all of the impurities, and then recover a radium fraction that you can use. That did not work too good for the TK100. There's still some work ongoing, as it retains quite large number of elements: radium, strontium, lead, thorium, uranium. So we still try to get a sequential method to get all of these from one sample. Looking not too bad, but still quite some work to be put in. And we do get limits on the type of samples that can be analyzed. There are interferences from matrix elements. So we switched a bit to TK101 resin, which is actually based on crown ether in ionic liquid. It's getting a bit better. That's uranium, thorium are not retained on these. There's still quite wide range of elements that are retained. Radium, barium, strontium, lead, mostly cesium, which might be a little less problematic in normal environment samples. Then radium elution at 1 molar nitric acid. As you can see, chemistry is getting a bit messy here, and that's something that we're at the moment trying to figure out, getting a bit more precise data. But the idea is to try to elute radium on its own by keeping barium and strontium and lead on the resin and having a pure radium fraction. Not entirely sure if that's going to be pure enough for LSC measurement. It's probably going to be good enough for ICP, for maybe mass spec. For LSC, I feel we still need to improve the method quite a bit. But at the end of the day, it's not really what we're looking for. There are still quite a lot of elements that are separated at the same time. So we are working quite a lot right now on calixoline-based resins that should have much higher selectivity for radium over these elements, particularly radium and barium selectivity. So in the ideal case, we would like to be able to switch, keep the barium or remove the barium, either to use it as internal standard or to remove it to have a high purity radium fraction. Okay, from that I'm going more on the development end. Something that's going to be well, it's actually occupying quite large part of the group right now, is to move away, or to add to the resins membrane filters. So basically, look into filtration as a means for separation. And it's not new. We found a way to more or less easily transpose pretty much any resin that we have into a membrane filter. So for the moment, we stick to about 50 ml per minute. For selected extractants, we might be able to go higher. I think the most logical and the best application would be water samples, 0.5. I think we went up to like 5 liter for lead. So in systems that have a very, very high selectivity, it is possible to pre-concentrate analytes like lead from quite large volumes. Another thing, again, that we're looking to is sampling in the field. So directly pre-concentrating on the disk and then bring the disk to the laboratory and analyze. Something that has taken quite a lot of importance too is passive sampling by DHT, so diffusive gradients in thin films. We have quite a lot of corporations ongoing that are using these kind of membranes as support for these passive sampling devices, particularly TK100 and TK101 are currently being tested. So the one that we're looking to is a TK201 for technetium, TK100 strontium lead. That's actually already pretty far. There's going to be a publication, different field, pretty soon on strontium isotope ratios in soil samples. TK101 for lead and radium. CL resin for iodine. I think that's something that might be quite interesting, not only for iodine 1 to 9. Also, that's a point that's getting more and more important in what we do, iodine 131. So looking what is happening with radionuclides that are used in nuclear medicine once they go into the environment.
We have 1 minute.
Nearly finished. Yeah, nearly finished. Thank you. And using the same as a support for testing. So basically, just a test stick, get into an LSC cocktail, and then the measure or do a mass spectrometry. I'm going to skip that. Quality control. So basically, instead of using membranes, using TLC paper impregnated with a selective extractant, this is really mostly for nuclear medicine. You spot, you run, you cut out a pure beta emitter that is not easy to measure by other means. So germanium-68 or strontium-90, put an LSC cocktail, LSC counter, and then try to determine, is there any strontium-90 left in my yttrium-90 source, or is there any germanium-68 left in my gallium? So that's something that is currently ongoing. Otherwise, there's plenty of other R&D projects are still ongoing. If you feel that any of these are something that that's of interest for you, please just shoot me an email and I'd be more than happy to discuss. So DTMs, especially selenium, remain of quite high interest. Rapid test, that's definitely something that is gaining in interest. In the field sampling, as mentioned, bioavailability studies like diffusive gradient thin films is something that we do get more frequently as questions. And again, the occurrence of or the use of radioactivity in nuclear medicine is generating a whole new range of questions and what's happening with these radionuclides once they are left leaving the nuclear medicine department. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Stephen, for your very comprehensive introduction of your products and used for the separation of the reading colors. Now I think it's open for the questions or comments for all the participants. Okay, that Ginger has questions. Okay, good. Please, Ginger.
Hello, Stevie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So I'm very interested in your TK201. This reasons you mentioned it's especially to separate the technetium from mass of the molybdenum. I think this is very important for isotope production of the molybdenum, because now they are doing something about the irradiation of the molybdenum 100, and then to separate the techniques as a radiopharmaceutical. Can you tell me what is the molybdenum capacity of these races?
This is actually very, very difficult to answer. There is technically no capacity, as there is no selectivity for the molybdenum. What we've seen is that we seem to be in some kind of sweet spot of, or let's say ideal concentration is 8 gram of molybdenum per gram of resin. So that seems to be where we get highest recovery. So yeah, it's not really a capacity. It's we feel that we get the best kind of separation and retention of the technetium at 8, maybe 10 gram of molybdenum per gram of resin.
Okay,
Which is important. Yeah, we indeed.
This is already become commercial or not?
Yes.
Oh yes, we can contact.
Yeah. Yes,
okay,
so
thank you.
It is pleasure.
Yes. Is there any other questions or comments? Okay, if there is no, and then I think we can move to the next.